Welcome back to another episode of Whiskey and Wine. Today's going to be a little bit of a different one. It's going to be a little bit shorter because there's not a ton to talk about on this topic, but I feel like we still need to address it. So, let's go. So today we're going to be talking about why two bottles of Zinfandel, both from California, end up tasting so different or can taste different. Now, there's going to be a lot of reasons for that. So for these two specific bottles that I have in front of me, one is from Sonoma, the other is from Napa Valley. One is 2020, one's 2021. So we already have two different sub-regions that are going to make it taste a little different. And then we also have two different years. That's also going to make the wine taste different to some degree. There's going to be a couple of other things that are going to change really between the wines, and you don't always see it very clearly like marketed sometimes if you don't really look for it. Although it does have to be somewhere on the bottle if this other reason is taking place. What I'm talking about is the 75% rule within the United States. Now, for an outside the United States, it's typically 85%, or people will call it the 15% rule. But we're talking about in the US real quick, the 75% rule. This is basically that the single varietal of a wine, so this Zinfandel, has to be at least 75% Zinfandel. So this could be Zinfandel plus something else to just make the flavors hit a little bit. Whether this is just rounding it out, making the wine taste a little more juicy, whatever it may be, they can put in other grapes to make the wine taste good. They don't have to. You can go up to 100%, obviously, but the minimum is 75%. Now, there's also a little bit of a caveat there where you're going to see some drop down to a 51%. And that's going to be if the overall flavor of the wine is just too aggressive. It's too crazy to be a single varietal. They need to blend something with it at that 51% mark. And then the rest is going to be something else, again, to make it so that wine tastes good. If a wine is way too overpowering, it's not as palatable, well, people aren't going to drink it. I did find it interesting that we don't see that rule, at least I didn't find any evidence of it in Europe or in just other places that make wine in South America, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, anything like that. I didn't find that ruling. And what I'm curious about is if that might be due to how American wine typically can be very juicy and very fruit forward and very aggressive with the flavors that are presented. Whereas if you contrast that with words, wow. Whereas if you contrast that with something from Europe or any old world locations, you might get something that's softer there, more aggressive here. And when they're both at 100%, the American one might just be too much for someone to palate. Now, I say in general in the US first, because there are going to be distinctions within the US that make it so they can't do that. So, like in Texas, for example, I believe I saw something where their wine, they also have to be at that 85% level. And I'm guessing there are going to be some places, again, in California or other places where they say this has to be this to be our wine. Another example is in Oregon. I believe they have theirs set to at least 85%. It might be 100% actually for a single varietal of their most sold grapes or the most produced grapes out there have to be 100% to be a Oregon Pinot Noir. Now, I think someone could still say this is a Pinot Noir, but to have that appellation on it, to say it's from Oregon, you have to follow their rules to make that work. So we're just talking general US there. And then smaller places, they can have their rules. And as far as I can see over in Europe, they follow that 85% and they call it their 15% rule because that 15% could be something else. So depending on what is blended into the wine, you're going to get something that might taste a little bit different. So say these were both Zinfandels from the same year, same region, same everything, but they blended it with a different grape. They're not going to call it a red blend, but you're going to get some different notes in there. Now, these two are not. I'm pretty sure both these are single varietal, but just for sake of argument, that's what we're talking about right now. I do like to read the exact legal distinction, especially when I'm quoting something from the TTB or anything like that. So I have that here, and I'm going to go ahead and read that real quick so you guys can understand the legalese of it as well as the layman's terms. So per the TTB, the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax Trade Bureau in the US, Wine must be made at a minimum percentage of a grape varietal. You may use the name of a single grape varietal on the label if 75% or more of the wine is that named grape variety. There are exceptions. Two of these exceptions are 51% or more of the wine is made from a grape. The entire qualifying percentage of the named grape was grown in the labeled appellation. Blah, blah, blah. Wine made from grape variety that the appropriate TTB officer finds to be too strongly flavored at the 75% minimum may be labeled at the grape variety if 51% is that grape. So that's one thing. And then I just want to pull up the other one from Oregon because I find that one interesting, and it is 90%. So that's what we're looking at for Oregon. They are sitting at a 90%. Some places are sitting at 85. Some places are sitting at that 75. But depending on where you're getting your wine from is going to dictate whether or not that is going to be a true single varietal. Now, they do have to label it on the wine somewhere, and most places will usually tell you just like straight away on the back, it will say something like 85% Zinfandel, and then 15% whatever the rest of it is. Or if it's like 5% something, 8% something, whatever that random little blend is that they have on there, that should be outlined somewhere on the bottle so that you understand. Now, if they don't do that, you can always go online, look it up. You can find all of that information. But for a single varietal, that does need to be on there. If it is a red blend or just like a named wine, like I have one bottle, it is called Fire. It's a red blend, but they don't say it. But you don't get the actual breakdown of the wine right on the label. I don't think you actually have to go online and find it. But as long as you are drinking a single varietal, you might end up with something that has a little bit of something else mixed into it. That will be on the back of the bottle. So I do encourage you guys, whenever you're going out, you're buying wine, you're tasting wine, something like that, and you're like, this is a little bit more different than I'm used to, check that out. There might be something else hiding in there that will make your wine taste a little bit different. For the most part, we don't see it too often, especially with something like a Zinfandel from Sonoma or from Napa, but you never know. So hopefully that explains a little bit more of why your wine might be tasting a little bit different when it's from somewhere else. Cheers, guys.